Well, welcome back. We're talking about China-Russia relations following President Xi Jinping's just concluded meetings in Moscow. Let's get back to our panel. Let's go to Victoria again in Moscow. And Victoria, we were talking a moment ago about the international strategic balance, the balance of power in the Asian region. Let's talk about the deployment of the U.S. THAAD anti-missile system. This has been the focus of much attention in China as well as in Russia. China is totally opposed to that, so is the DPRK. And Russia has also said that it opposes the deployment of that THAAD system. What is Russia's view on the deployment of THAAD, and why is Russia opposed to it?
Well, if we talk about THAAD, it's obviously something that Russia would not be supporting. And while it is probably more dangerous development for China strategically, it's also it is something that Russia is saying that, okay, it is very similar to what the United States was doing with deployment of the similar system, not THAAD, of course, but ABM system in their Eastern European countries, when it was using Iranian threat as a pretext, while it had no influence over possibility to counter or to kind of look over Iran, but rather was directed at against Russia, against its own nuclear potential. So in this regard, THAAD is probably more directed at containing Chinese military potential, but it also means higher military involvement and more of a American presence in the region, very close to Russia, and that is why it's going together with both China, mostly with China in terms of opposing it, although probably with less vigor than the People's Republic of China.
Okay, Song, let's talk about the economic trade relationship between China and Russia. China's signature development program is the Belt and Road Initiative. Russia leads a group of countries called the Eurasian Economic Union. How does Belt and Road fit in with Russia's plans for that region? Do you see some kind of symbiosis here that they could help each other out?
Yes, this Eurasia area is very crucial for China and Russia both. And as you said, China has this OBOR, and Russia has European Eurasia Economic Union initiative. And in the last 2 years, I see the developing understanding between these two countries on their common interest in this area. And I think Russia realized it can use its strategic geopolitical influence to work together with China's economic strength and to benefit each other. And also China can utilize this Eurasia area to expand its link with European countries. I think this is a win-win situation. It's good for both countries.
And Yunsen, a lot of this program talks about transport infrastructure, developing communications in the region, highways, airports, ports, railways. How important is that for both these countries in that particular part of the world?
Well, for China, it is important because China faces a problem of overcapacity, industrial capacity domestically. So for China, these infrastructure projects or these infrastructure contracts represent a good opportunity for the Chinese industries faced with a saturated domestic market. So when Chinese state-owned enterprises and private businesses wants to explore business opportunity outside China, the Central Asia region, which is geographically vast but does not have enough financing or the capability to develop their infrastructure, especially in transportation, is a perfect location for these Chinese companies to launch into. And for Russia, it is also important because we know that Russia is the largest country in the world, especially in the Eurasia region. Not only Russia, but also the Kazakhstan, the Stans, these countries also face a problem of shortage of financing, the funding to develop these projects. So I think what China is providing is both the financial resources and also the industrial capability to develop these infrastructure projects. And looking into the long run, the transportation network by themselves are not the end game. The end game is trade facilitation between China through these regions and with these regions. So hopefully the economic development through the trade facilitation based on the better development of infrastructure in the region will be the end game.
Right, and when you say trade facilitation, are you saying that both countries will open their markets to each other?
I think that's only part of the plan because without the transportation network, trade is unlikely to flow. And in fact, for that region, the lack of infrastructure development is one of the key reasons for the lack of trade flow between China and these countries. So I think you're right. To opening the market is only part of the deal. But if China looks west, the market represented by Central Asian countries is still limited. But Central Asia is an indispensable corridor if China wants to look further west into Europe. So I think the trade facilitation does not only lie in the opening of the markets in both China and Central Asian countries, but also opening the doors for China into West Europe.
Right, Victoria, another big international issue on which both these countries seem to be in agreement, and that is climate change. Both Russia and China are strong supporters of the Paris Accord on climate change. The United States, of course, under its new president, Donald Trump, pulled out of that accord. So does this now give Moscow and Beijing the opportunity to take the lead on this very important issue internationally?
Well, sure, but probably I would like to tell a bit more on the previous issue of the OBOR and joint cooperation of two countries on the BRI initiative and get the climate within this.
Right.
I think there probably we need to get more of cooperative initiative and bringing their logistics and bringing their infrastructure development into their bilateral cooperation of two countries, and this to go beyond their Primoria 1, Primoria 2 projects, beyond their route to Moscow and then further to Europe through the southern corridor. I think that there's probably the best option for the two countries to built on the infrastructure development, both by involving Chinese investors, but also through multilateral projects that we have in, for example, new BRICS Bank that we have within AIIB. And for example, if we talk about NDB, New Development Bank, that we're looking into alternative energy and the green energy, and this is exactly how we feed into also the climate change and help promoting the two countries' role in terms of supporting the Paris Climate Agreement and also going forward. So I think there should be a way for the two countries to combine the two to get their more of investments, more of projects into development infrastructure, green energy infrastructure, but also supported by the energy security system that would have a global undercut.
Right, Song, international relations is as much about facts on the ground and substantive agreements as it is about perceptions and how countries' relationships are seen. So when we look at this meeting that took place in Moscow, how significant is it coming just ahead of the G20 meeting? Will these two countries now go to that big meeting in Germany with a united front?
This meeting was 21st meeting between President Xi Jinping and President Putin. And it especially happened just before the G20 summit in Germany. I think this G20 summit will be very challenging and a very, very special one, because this is the first summit Mr. Trump will be attending after his inauguration. And we already see his strong dispute with other 6 Western countries in May in G7 summit. And in this G20 meeting, I think USA, other Western countries, China and Russia will discuss a lot of very challenging issues, including this climate change issue, Middle East issue, free trade issue, like Syria and Ukraine, other issues. China and Russia have established the tradition of coordinating with each other's strategic options before any important international events. I think this meeting in Moscow will coordinate the two leaders' positions on these kind of important issues. And I think that will play a very important role in this coming summit in G20.
And Yun-Sun, no doubt one of the other issues that will be discussed at the G20 is the situation on the Korean Peninsula. There has been a multilateral forum to try and resolve this crisis there, known as the Six-Party talks, which involve China, which involve Russia, which involve the United States, among others. Whatever happened to those Six-Party talks?
Well, Six-Party talks has been suspended for quite some time, and it's not only because DPRK announced it is withdrawn from Six-Party talks, but also because there is a perception in the United States that Six-Party talks has not effectively stalled or stopped DPRK from its further nuclear development. So there's a debate as for whether Six-Party talks has been an effective platform to deal with North Korean nuclear development. And with the most recent missile test by North Korea, I'm fairly sure that the UN Security Council is going to have more discussions about what the international community can jointly do to deal with the nuclear provocation by North Korea. But I think China does have a point when Beijing says that essentially the issue for the North Korea nuclear development is a security dilemma, it's a security concern. And that issue can only be resolved between United States and North Korea.
Well, there's been a lot of stick. Perhaps it's time for the carrot right now, and we had that previously. It was known as the sunshine policy. Do you see that coming back?
We see that, well, we know that the progressive government in South Korea is famous for its engagement propensity or its tendency to engage North Korea. But currently, that policy faces a lot of questions. For example, to what extent those engagement policies or leniency by South Korea towards North Korea is going to be in violation of the UN Security Council sanction resolution. And also, given President Trump's tougher position on North Korea, what about the coordination between United States and South Korea on their engagement towards North Korea? If Washington does not support such engagement policy, I think there is an upper limit as for how far Seoul can go.
Okay, we have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for joining us. That's it for this edition of The Heat.